Okay, I think we'll get underway. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today during what I'm sure is a really busy term, finishing up the half year in our Australian and New Zealand markets, or the end of the school year in our international markets. My name's Chris Barr and I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Schoolbox, and today I'm joined by James Leckie, who is our co-founder and our Chief Product Owner. Today's webinar is focused on helping our community better understand Schoolbox Cloud. Over a number of years, we've invested significantly in developing a really robust, secure, and high-performing cloud offering that meets the evolving needs of our schools. As more schools look to reduce infrastructure overheads, strengthen their security and access, ongoing platform innovation, Schoolbox Cloud provides a modern and future-focused option designed specifically for education. I'm aware that recent self-hosted service charge communication sent to our self-hosted customers has generated conversation across our community, resulting in many of you attending the webinar today. If you do have specific questions about about the self-hosted community annual charge, please reach out to our school engagement managers, who will be able to provide individual support and guidance to each school about this communication. Over the course of this webinar, James will cover many of the questions we've received about cloud. He'll provide some insight into what the move to cloud can mean for schools and how our cloud offering is developed from an infrastructure, security, and future innovation perspective. I would encourage you to make use of the Q&A function. If you cannot use the chat, but use the Q&A function for any questions that you might have, that would be great. We will work to answer your questions at the end during the Q&A session. We won't answer during the middle of it. We'll wait until the end of the session. Once again, thanks again for joining us, and we'll get started, and I'll hand over to you, James.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for turning up today. Really important timing around communicating our strategy on cloud. This has been something we've been building and working on for a really long time, and I think we've really approached a level of maturity now that means that we're in a really great position to have this session. So first off, just a quick overview. Look, we're really going to dive deep into the technical side of things, talk around how we approach different things within the cloud environment to really help you gain a better understanding and develop some trust around our approach to infrastructure planning and the way we go about building out our cloud infrastructure for you. We're also going to look at it from a sort of value proposition and why you might be looking at this. What are the things that we think are the reason that this is actually a great idea? So I'm going to go through a bit of both today's session. Let's jump straight into it and start with why cloud. And really, we've been on this journey now for around 4 or 5 years. So this isn't something new. It is something that we have been thinking about for a long time. And we've identified a very long time ago that there was definitely a need for Schoolbox to develop an environment that was well managed, that delivered along a lot of requirements for schools in their sort of need to deliver the Schoolbox platform. And some of the challenges that we've sort of looked at and reviewed over that time have included things like the ability to scale out the need for RAM, CPU, storage, those things that have continually grown over the last few years as the capability of Schoolbox has become more and more powerful. We put more and more demands on school infrastructure, and some schools have had the capability to grow and expand. Some have not had that capability to grow and expand. So our infrastructure has been built to address that specific need. We're also finding increasingly schools are implementing stricter firewalls and compliance requirements around their perimeter, for good reason, to protect the data that it is housed within and to enable them to control their network perimeter and all of the systems within that environment. That has obviously been very challenging from a Schoolbox perspective, as we've had to support and maintain an increasingly complex environment of perimeter defense and even infrastructure management. And that has increased the complexity of our service, because every school has implemented their own approach and their own practice. And that's created a real driver for us to deliver that as a standardized package that we can provide to all schools in a standardized way at the lowest possible cost. The other thing, obviously, for us is around email has been a challenge for us. As we've been in the on-premise environment, we have been integrated traditionally into schools' email delivery systems. But as schools have moved their the email delivery to the cloud. We've run into upstream issues with rate limiting and deliverability of that email that has caused us challenges around how do we guarantee the delivery of the communication from Schoolbox. And so by providing our own email service, we can actually provide more control over that delivery of email, ensuring better deliverability across the network. Let's look at where we're at with cloud adoption. And from a platform, I mentioned we've been on this journey for quite some time now. And back around FY 21, 22, we started our build out of cloud. And then really by FY 24, we were only at 6%. Then last year, we'd achieved around 23% of our fleet was running cloud. And just as we're talking now, we're just past the halfway mark in that half of the schools running Schoolbox now run in the cloud, and the other half are running on-prem. We expect that this trend will continue, and we will continue to see this growth in cloud adoption over the next 2 years, increasing 70 to 80 to 90% over the next few years as we look forward. So we highly anticipate that this trend will continue and schools will continue to adopt cloud on quite a substantial rate across our network. I should mention also here, underlying these figures, is that all new customers onboarding onto Schoolbox or onboarding onto cloud, really the ones that are in this on-premise network are really our older customers that have been with us for many years, from predating when we had the cloud service available. From a Schoolbox cloud perspective, I mentioned we started this build out, almost 5 years ago now, and we're really in our fourth major iteration of this build out. We've learned a lot along the way. We've had many sort of false starts, rebuilds, redesigns, and iterations that we've gone through to get to the point where we're at now in terms of really highly scalable, dependable, reliable infrastructure. In the early days, we had some issues, obviously, with scalability as we brought new customers on. A lot of those things have been addressed and outworked, and those lessons have been learnt and implemented into our latest infrastructure iterations. And so today I'm going to really talk through what are those changes that we've done to make this the most dependable platform, and what does that look like for you in terms of our infrastructure. The other thing we should mention, a lot of work has gone into, has been the migration process. And when we started out, a migration would take us, hours and hours and hours of work. It was very manual. But as we've done more and more migrations over that time, we've really reduced down the effort and time required for that and turned that into a well-oiled machine. And we'll go through that migration process a bit later and what that looks like for you as a school. But from the Schoolbox side, we've really got that down to a fine art, and we were able to spin up a new Schoolbox cloud instance in very short amount of time, in 15 minutes here, and then deliver you and uplift your entire environment into that cloud environment very quickly. In terms of what those iterations and rebuilds look like and how we've sort of driven this improvement across the generations of our cloud infrastructure. So just a quick overview of some of the recent enhancements that we've delivered to the Schoolbox cloud network. We redesigned our VPC structure to create specific designed zones for different regions, our global control plane, and some other things to really segment our cloud infrastructure to put up those barriers and define those security requirements that schools are looking for around that architecture of a well-defined cloud infrastructure. And I'll show you some diagrams of that a bit later. Next up, we've moved all of our compute from Intel to ARM. And for those that are familiar with Amazon, there is significant cost savings to be had by moving to Graviton AWS compute. And all of our Schoolbox platform has been now migrated onto that Graviton architecture, allowing us to deliver further cost savings and compute scalability to all of our customers. We've also moved a lot of our compute onto latest generation disk, so making sure that we've got access to NVMEs or SSDs where appropriate, making sure that we've got the highest speed disk available in all cases across our entire architecture. Our databases have been through many different structures, and this is probably one of the areas that we've had the most sort of capacity issues, is around how we manage our databases. And this comes towards how we scale our databases and how many schools we put on a database. And so a lot of those calculations and those thought processes have gone through, and we now have a very clearly identified structure for how we approach the design of our database capacity, so that we're ensuring that you've always got access to the throughput that you require, even during those peak times at 9 a.m. in the morning, when everyone's logging in at the first moment. We want to make sure the database is absolutely able to deliver that throughput. And so we've designed a lot of work around what sort of speed we have for databases, and also what type of school amounts we have on those. Another big thing we've done through here is cross-cloud replication, and I'll talk a little bit about this in bit more detail a bit later on. But when we've done some disaster analysis around what are the potential disaster risks in this infrastructure. One of the things we identified very early on was that there was a risk that Amazon just disappeared one day. And so we wanted to mitigate that particular disaster. Very unlikely, but it is something we wanted to mitigate against. In fact, we actually experienced something like this in the Middle East when the war broke out, that we had to move all of our workloads out of the Middle East into Singapore. So we've already had disaster incidents like this. We wanted to make sure that we had cross-cloud replication, so that if anything happened to Amazon, we still maintained all of your data and were able to bring back your data, recognizing that school data is business critical, and that we need to have multiple places and locations and multiple clouds involved in this data storage of that mission critical data. We've also built out a full auto-scaling platform that allows us to scale up workloads and attract and bring more compute when required, specifically around those 9 a.m. times. We make sure that we're actually delivering that extra compute when required. And then on school holidays or other times, we're able to scale right back, and that gives us cost savings across the network as well. Looking at the regions, so over the last few years, we started out in Sydney and we had one cluster in Sydney. And as we've grown, we've added up. Now we have 4 clusters in the Sydney region. They're spread across multiple AZs. We also have clusters now in Melbourne, Singapore, and Frankfurt. That gives us a great reach across multiple different data areas and data compliance. And so when you're thinking about data sovereignty, this is the sort of the information that you need to understand from a data sovereignty perspective, where your data will be located in those clusters in either Sydney, Melbourne. And that'll be a conversation that we have with you as we onboard you onto the cloud about what cluster is appropriate for your instance, where it should go, whether it should go in Melbourne, whether it should go in Sydney. We can have those conversations with you around right location for your data to be stored, and where is appropriate for that data to be stored in that Amazon network that we operate. So I mentioned a bit about scalability, and I just wanted to drill down into what that means to you as a school. So one of the things that we know about the Schoolbox workload is that it's very burst orientated. So we have 2 or 3 peak periods during the day, and then we have quite a few quiet periods. And if you're running this infrastructure in your own on-premise environment, you're probably just provisioning the infrastructure required for that maximum peak load. So you're creating all the infrastructure needed for the time that you need it, which is probably 9 a.m. in the morning when everyone logs in. You're making sure that your machine is spec'd to that level to deliver that. In the cloud, we were able to dynamically scale depending on the load. And this allows us to right-size the requirements right down to the 15-minute, 5-minute blocks. So we are automatically scaling up load in preloading the servers, getting them ready for that 9 a.m. peak, and they will spin up automatically and prepare for that load as it comes in. And then we'll have that computer available. And as we go throughout the day, we'll slowly turn compute containers off, reducing our overall costs. And this is actually ultimately what allows us to deliver quite a low cost infrastructure to service for you. And often people ask us, isn't cloud more expensive? When you do all the costs and calculations, it's these types of optimizations that allow us to deliver a really highly efficient, cost-effective solution for you for that infrastructure hosting. The other side of scalability is storage. And for anyone who's managing a NAS or a SAN and having to add more and more disk to the Schoolbox instance, knowing that it constantly grows, in the cloud environment, we use object storage, which allows us to dynamically grow. We're only charged for what we use. We also plug that storage into CDNs as well, so we're able to deliver the data directly from the object storage very quickly. So that gives us complete scalability. So no matter whether you're a huge school of thousands and thousands of students, or if you're a tiny little school that's only 100 or 200 students, we're able to make sure that we are right sizing the infrastructure specifically for your needs and the requirements that you have. So scalability gives us the ability to adapt dynamically, explicitly for what you require. And even within schools of the same size, we know that we have schools that maybe they're around 1,000 students, but one school is heavily invested in Schoolbox as a product and they're using it for everything. And we will give them the compute and the storage that they require for that usage. And the same goes, we've got other schools that aren't using everything and they're just using a small bit and they will only get the small bit that they need. So it's great for those schools that are really heavy users as well. They get the benefits of this scalability. So let's talk about data segregation, and this is a really important topic, and I think there's lots of questions probably around data segregation and how we approach this. So I'm going to try and explain this a few different times from different perspectives. So data segregation is really important for both security and data sovereignty. From a security perspective, the data segregation allows us to ensure that other schools do not have access to your data or either by accident or through malicious attacks. So it allows us to make sure that there's never any leakage between two systems. And we do this by ensuring that every instance has its own file storage, its own database with its own keys and credentials that are only accessible to that school. So this allows us to make sure that although compute and those pieces might be shared, at the actual permission layer, the logical layer, we're actually able to ensure that only the school can access their data and only them can access that information. And there is never any commingling of data. There is never any shared data. There is a few microservices where we share the microservices across those, but most of those do not have data persistence. Those services are simple single access services that then go away. They're shared, but wherever it comes to your school data, we always make sure that that is logically segregated so that it's secure. The other side of data segregation is sovereignty. And from a data sovereignty perspective, we want to make sure that you own your data and that when you leave Schoolbox, you're able to take your data and also we're able to remove all of your data from our systems. This is a compliance requirement around many different jurisdictions for data privacy that we can actually guarantee that we can delete your data after you leave. By ensuring we have strong data segregation practices and processes, we're actually able to categorically delete your data at the termination of your agreement as well. We hope you never leave. But if you do want to leave Schoolbox, we are able to actually target these two databases and file storage areas and wipe all data from our systems so we have no record of your user data moving forward. So that's a really important part of data sovereignty and data segregation as well. Systems that don't do that separation will have a lot more difficulty or trouble completely deleting the data belonging to a customer. But because of this strong level of segregation, it's very easy for us to execute that. Speaking of data and data belonging to you and data sovereignty, I just wanted to touch on data access. And we've had a long history of providing schools with access to their data. We've always strongly believed that your data belongs to you and is owned by you. And as a result, you should have access to that data. And this is very much the definition in our minds of what data sovereignty is. Your ability to access and control and exfiltrate your own data for your own purposes. So from a Schoolbox perspective, when we meant to implement the cloud, we wanted to make sure we maintained that same level of access that you had previously when you were on-prem. So what does that mean? We still provide direct database access to our system as well as you have on-prem. So because we've got that data segregation, we can also provide you your own access to your own data via a DB connector as well. So you can write your own DB queries, connect to the database. We provide it via SSH tunnel, so it's secure, and you do that through a support request to us to get that access, and we provision the security around that for you. Of course, we've got all of our APIs available as well. And so all of the APIs are available in the cloud, and of course, you can get access to all that data. There are a few other bits and pieces. All of our Premier partners, all of our integrations all still work. And I should mention that includes our SIS integrations. Now, there are some SIS integrations that are API first, and those, of course, will work when you move from on-prem to cloud. So any SIS integration that's API, for example, TAS, Veracross, or ISAMs are all API based. For those that are direct DB, for example, Synergetic, we have an ability to connect to that over an encrypted channel. So that is also a possibility as well. So we are able to access and integrate back into your network. Obviously, you have to allow us back through your perimeter to connect to those SISs, but that is something we can definitely work with you to configure as well and set up so we can connect to that SIS. Obviously, we hope that all SISs have APIs, and that makes integration much easier and much more performant in the cloud. But for those that don't, we still maintain the old integration methods as well. Just moving on to data backups and what that looks like in the cloud. Now, one of the benefits of cloud is that it gives us a lot more data protection capabilities, things that aren't available on-prem. So in moving from the on-prem environment, most schools are required to implement their own backup system on the Schoolbox VM. So that might be Veeam or some other monitoring system that actually takes images of our images. With the way that Schoolbox operates in the cloud, we have two data sets, the storage and the database. With our storage, we actually make sure that our storage is completely version controlled. So that makes it almost immutable. So if any changes come through to that, we can actually roll back those changes. So everything from deletes to file updates can be undone because of the version control on AWS S3. We're also able to replicate your data across multiple clouds, as I mentioned earlier. So we have multi-cloud replication. So in the event that we have a complete cloud outage, your data will be stored in one of two cloud systems, Cloudflare or AWS, allowing us to restore back to one of the available clouds that still remains. We've got really good storage redundancy and backup on that storage data. From the database perspective, we take snapshots of the data every night. Those snapshots are then stored on a daily, weekly, monthly backlog. We go up to 12 months back. We have up to 2 weeks of dailies. We also take snapshots, by the way, when we do upgrades, of course, as well. So if something goes wrong with an upgrade, we're able to restore back to those as well. We should also mention here that we've been experimenting with the binary logs of the database as well, which gives us almost recovery time to 5 minutes. So that allows us to provide a really high level of recovery time beyond just the 24 hours that a daily backup allows. We also keep sort of the change log for that day, allowing us to get our restore time all the way down to 5 minutes. That has taken a bit longer to restore. So we've seen that being probably a 2-hour sort of restore time, but having a restore point of 5 minutes has been a great move forward as well. Something that you can't do with other backup solutions. So some of those benefits of cloud, we really do have a much more sophisticated and deep level of backup control that you wouldn't get access to in a on-premise environment. Obviously, you won't see in here any air-gapped backups, but the combination of the version control and the cloud replication across multi-clouds, we believe gives us protection against most types of attacks on that data store. So in event of a compromise of any one of our data stores, we've always got the other data store to fall back on. All right, let's move to security specifically and talk a little bit about, what security looks like from a Schoolbox perspective. And I haven't mentioned this earlier, but the first thing that I should say is that all of our infrastructure is managed as infrastructure as code. That allows us to do version control and monitoring of changes to our environment, and all changes to our environment are reviewed and signed off by multiple people. The first thing is we've got that sort of audit control over how our infrastructure is provisioned and how it's managed. And that's how we're able to ensure every cluster is the same across all the regions. We're doing that through our infrastructure as code controls. Then the next level of that is our sort of network perimeter that we've designed around our VPC. Obviously, everything's locked down so that only the services that are specifically provisioned have the ability to communicate. No other communication can go in or out, and it is a very locked down environment. It's completely locked down. It's very hard to get even into that environment. And we'll talk about compute, for example. Even our engineers are unable to access the compute layers anymore. So we've almost locked ourselves out of a lot of these layers now, just to make sure that they are completely secure and locked off from the world. So we have to sort of almost manage these things at a distance. We have started implementing WAF around the perimeter as well. So we have started putting in place WAF rules to protect against DOS protection and some other protections. We're investigating increasing that capability, looking at more sophisticated analysis tools, AI, things like that as well. And I'll talk a bit about roadmap later. All of our access to our environment, obviously from a user perspective, our agents, our support agents, is MFA'd through our identity system. And we also have Cloudflare Zero Trust as well to manage our access into the environment. So you have to be both authorized through our Zero Trust system and also through our identity and MFA system. So we do have quite a lockdown process for how you access this environment. And it's obviously only provided to key engineers within the organization, that access. So we do have that all role-based control. Who can access what levels of our environment and what access they have is all locked down to exactly what people require in order to do their job. On the monitoring side, we do provide 24/7 monitoring of our environment. We have a observation platform that monitors our environment 24/7. It sends alerts and pages to our team in the event of any events occurring. So it is a fully managed and monitored platform 24/7. So we do have that full oversight of that environment. So if there is any incidents or unexpected things going on within our network, our team will be alerted. We will assemble what we call an incident team, create an incident response, and then go through a whole incident checklist process by which we approach those incidents. You would have seen the outcomes of those incidents. You would have seen probably us posting PIRs, post-incident reviewing. We also have our status page as well, where we keep people up to date with any ongoing incidents as they develop, keeping them notified and aware of what's going on, so you can check in. And I do highly subscribe, if you haven't already subscribed, go and subscribe to the status page, so that you can get updates about our service and any known issues that we're currently experiencing, and any updates around the resolution of that will be pushed out via our status page. Let's have a quick look at the architecture of Schoolbox. And I really wanted to bring up this slide, not because I'm expecting anyone to understand all this, but just to give an idea of the difference between what an on-prem Schoolbox looks like and what a cloud Schoolbox looks like. So the dark area on the right-hand side is actually the Schoolbox cluster that I've been talking about. That is where your instance lives within the environment. And in there is a RDS database. We have virus scanning, we have compute, and we have what we use for our WAF and our web router that routes all the web requests through into that VPC. Around the outside of that, we have what we call our regional VPC, and this is regional. So this will be Sydney or Melbourne. And so we can have multiple clusters in a region. So in Sydney, we have 4 of these clusters, and then then we have a regional control layer. In that regional control layer, you'll have things like the storage levels, so S3. You'll have things like Cloudflare storage, all of those, and some other microservices like AI and things like that also are shared across the region, because they don't need to be specific to that particular cluster. And then finally, there's the control plane layer. The control plane layer, the cloud global layer, is actually where all the control happens. And this is sort of where the keys to the kingdom are. And this is where everything is sort of provisioned from and maintained. And so this is sort of our most highly secure and highly sensitive area. That is the area that is the most tightly sort of controlled and locked down. And that is pretty much only available to people inside of the Schoolbox environment. So that's the sort of layers of how we approach the design of our cloud. There is a lot of services in there running in the cloud today. Some of these are shared via on-premise. So for example, in the global environment, we have our observation services, and those observation services are shared with on-prem and cloud. So we do have some shared global services across both. But anything in the clusters or regional is purely there for our cloud customers. Those cloud clusters can scale up. We typically will put between 30 and 40 schools on a single cluster. That is probably our maximum. We do right size based on a few different parameters, not just schools. We also look at student numbers, and we also look at engagement and usage of the platform as well. So we might have a cluster with only 20 schools on it because those schools are really heavily using, or they might be really large schools. And so those parameters go into how we determine the right sizing for clusters. We have multiple clusters because we want to manage a thing we call blast radius. So if we have an issue within a cluster, we want to minimize the damage that can cause. And so by minimizing the amount of schools that are in that cluster, we then minimize the blast radius. So that allows us to ensure that if something goes critically wrong with one cluster, it's not affecting the entire fleet, it's only affecting a small handful of schools. And so that allows us to minimize the risks and manage the risk associated with some critical issue within a cluster. All right, so quickly moving around. So just to sum up around what are really the benefits for cloud. So firstly, from a resilience perspective, we do have a really stable platform. As you can see from that architecture, there is a lot of resilience built in. So if things fail, we often have services that spin up in the background automatically to repair those issues. So we are able to dynamically repair and adapt, and there's a lot more monitoring going on in that environment. From a performance perspective, all of the files I mentioned earlier are delivered via a CDN. What that means is that the files are actually closer to your users wherever they are, whether they're in Sydney, whether in Queensland, whether they're in WA, or even in Singapore. It doesn't really matter. The CDN will make sure that the files are located as close to the customer as possible, increasing their responsiveness and the speed of your platform for all users, not just those that are on site and on premise for your instance. And of course, when you move to cloud, you get all of those resources that you have available, that you have in your network, back to redistribute for other things. I know a lot of you out there are building, new services and vibe coding things with AI, and those new resources that you've got currently can be redeployed to those API use cases and AI use cases. And of course, just a simple thing, you moving the staff overhead of monitoring and managing that infrastructure from your team to ours. So our team is the one that will be up at night fixing the issue, rather than having your team on the phone as well, also working on the issue as well. So it does help us resolve issues faster, but also means your teams are less likely to need to be on call for any critical incidents. Along the way, we've also made a lot of changes to the design of our platform to, I guess, address a whole range of different modernized processes moving to the cloud. So first up, one of the things that we used to support was LDAP. Now in cloud, we use SAML or OAuth as our primary identity provider. So LDAP is slowly being turned off by all users that go into the cloud. We don't think it's secure to use LDAP over the internet, and there is options for how you do identity without needing LDAP. So for all schools that are moving to cloud, one of the first things we do is turn off their LDAP and upgrade them to SAML and OAuth. We also look at how you're interacting with Schoolbox and how you're connecting your third-party systems to it. And it's often a good opportunity to uplift to APIs, whether uplift to sys connectors, and we mentioned before the synergetic encrypted MS SQL. So all of these were previously technical roadblocks that would prevent a school to move to the cloud, have all now been identified and outworked, and we now have solutions to almost all of the technical issues that you might face as a school. Just quickly to go over the process by moving to cloud and what that looks like. So the first steps are obviously having a conversation with your school engagement manager, getting that agreement in place, and having a conversation around what that looks like for your school from a financial perspective. That then goes into our process once that's signed off. The first step for that is we assign an infrastructure team member to go through that process with you. They will do a checklist and make sure your instance of Schoolbox is ready to be moved to the cloud. And that might be some of those tech uplift things that I mentioned before, might be email, might be sys, all of those integration points out to third-party systems. We'll just make sure we're ready to do that migration. We'll also start uploading your files to the cloud. So in the background, we start a process that will upload all of your files into our cloud storage. So that can happen in the background prior to cutoff, so that we've got all your data stored in the cloud well before we do cutover. Once that data has been transferred, and that can depend on how big your school is. It can take everything from a day through to weeks, depending on your school's internet connection or the amount of storage that you have accrued over time. But once that's done, we can then book in your migration. And typically that migration, we book a 1 hour window, and downtime, we're looking at around 15 to 20 minutes to do a DNS cutover and a final data sync. So all of that happens and we cut you over. Once the DNS is updated, away you go on the new Schoolbox Cloud instance, and all your data will be in place in that new environment. So it's a very streamlined, very simple process. Not a lot on your side to do, other than working through those pre-migration steps with us, and getting all that technical detail sorted out. Once that's achieved, we pretty much are good to go with that migration. Just to finish off, as a last thing, I just thought we'd reflect on where we're heading with this cloud, because obviously as you've been with Schoolbox for a long time, you know what we pride ourselves in is continued investment and improvement and learning from what we've learned, getting feedback from our customers, and continuing to invest in this platform and the infrastructure that runs it. So some of the things that we're looking at currently and investing in is we're looking at moving towards more security accreditation and compliance. And with that, there are a few steps that we need to put in place to achieve that. We're also cognizant that we're increasingly getting asked more questions by schools around what we deliver in terms of security. So with that, there's a whole range of things going on in that space, but one of the first steps is actually implementing a WAF to monitor both ingress and egress traffic and do analysis on that traffic, looking for any malicious things within that traffic. So one of the things we want to develop, we've got a default rule set that we apply now, but we want to get more sophisticated than that. We want to start looking for active attacks within that traffic as well. The other thing that we're looking at from a firewall perspective is just how we transfer synergetic data across the wire. We've been investigating deploying an agent inside your network that creates a VPN pipeline to our network so that traffic can be completely secured over a VPN, and then we can connect directly to your Synergetic server through that VPN. We're looking at using Cloudflare Zero Trust for that as well. Some other things that we're working on, we've been working on this for quite some time. It's almost there, and that is better control over email. We are moving our email delivering from our existing postfixed server through to SES, which is Amazon Simple Email Service. When we do that, and that's going to start happening over the next few months, when we do that, we will then be able to give better logging and visibility access to that SES data. The challenge we have at the moment is that because all schools are sending through the one email service, providing access to that data would potentially be a data segregation issue. Part of the design of moving to SES is allowing us to segregate customer data so that we can provide access to segregated logs around email and give you better insight into what email traffic is coming in and out of Schoolbox in our cloud environment as well. One of the other areas that we want to involve is around multi-AZ databases. We want to improve the resilience around our database, and so we're investigating how we deploy multi-AZ databases so that we've got a cluster of databases. In the event of a single database failure, we will be able to fall back to a different region or a different AZ, allowing us to continue that service without interruption. Some other benefits of that is that we would probably be able to do upgrades to our databases without maintenance downtime either. So we'll be able to update databases, take them offline, update them, and bring them back into the cluster with very little impact to the uptime of Schoolbox. I mean, speaking of uptime, we already achieve a 99.99% uptime with Schoolbox. So we're really looking at, increasing the things to 3, 4, 9s. That's really where we're now working in and operating in. So it's not that we don't have great uptime already. It's about those extra hours here and there throughout the year that we're trying to really close the gap on. And then finally, an area that we're actively investigating is how do we give schools control over when updates apply and how those features roll out. This is something that we're looking at it from 2 different perspectives. One, from an application perspective, but also 2, from a deployment perspective. Now with the modern containerized compute, we can potentially run scaled compute for multiple versions of Schoolbox simultaneously, allowing schools to choose what version of Schoolbox they want their compute to operate on, giving us access to the ability to have some schools on one version, another school on another version. So there's quite a bit of flexibility that we can now do at where we're at, so that you've got more control over when updates change, when maybe the maintenance windows are, those types of things. We want to give a bit more flexibility there so that there's some room for move. We're obviously not going to be able to support versions forever, but giving schools a bit more control over when those changes apply. So maybe we have a week or a month where you can choose what day in that week or month that you want your change to apply. So those are the types of things that we're looking at on our roadmap. I'd love now to take your questions and hear directly from people on what they would hear. So Chris, do you want to read out some
James.
questions for me?
Yeah, thanks, James. I'll read out the questions. Some of them have been answered in some way, but I'll give you an opportunity just to add detail to it. So Matthew has asked, he's keen to understand how to track email sending from Schoolbox in the cloud. From a child safety view, I can currently report on what communication occurred between individuals with mail delivery happening on premise. What does this look like in the cloud?
Sorry, could you just repeat that?
Yeah, from a child safety view, I can
Yep.
currently report on what communication occurred between individuals with mail delivery happening on premise. What does this look like on the cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's sort of what I was talking about with the SES implementation. So we're actually approaching this problem from two different perspectives. On the Schoolbox product roadmap, we are actually looking at developing a communication log in the product. And so we're looking at how do we provide you with insight in the product around what communication has been sent to someone, and also what communication has been sent by someone. So we are looking at that from a product perspective, and that's going to be things like notifications and emails. The other side of it is more around the email logs, and the email logs provide a different type of solution, fix a different problem. So I think your context, I think the in-product is probably the better solution. But the email logs from an infrastructure perspective are also important from a deliverability perspective. So say, for example, you send an email in Schoolbox and we log it in the product and you know that it's been sent in the product. What the infrastructure layer can tell us is around deliverability. What server was that sent to? Did that server receive it? Was it junked because of junk mail? All of those things are stored in the infrastructure mail delivery logs. And so we need to actually solve both problems. We actually need to provide you access to the infrastructure email logs, as well as what things are being communicated from the Schoolbox platform itself. So we're well aware of the question that you are asking, and we've got both of those on our roadmap.
James has asked, James, can self-hosted customers move to a Graviton instant type?
Yeah, so I mentioned we use Graviton for our compute and purposes. Unfortunately, the way we package and deliver our code for the cloud is very much different to what we use for on-prem. And the on-prem environment has only been designed for Intel compute, and it's only available for Intel compute at this stage. And we don't really have much intention to probably support an ARM architecture for on-premise. So unfortunately, that's a no. The only way to get access to that benefit of the Gravitons is to move to our cloud platform. And that's to do with the way we package and manage containers and things like that, which is where that work was done.
James Reese has asked, for cloud hosted, what security controls sit above the baseline of a default Linux service that we may run from on-prem? Thinking EDR, threat monitoring, patching cadence. Given recent LMS breaches like Canvas, what's actively protecting student data in your cloud environment? And is the data encrypted at rest?
Yeah, so all of the usual, security questions we can answer. So from a data, I didn't mention this before when I was talking about the data storage, but everything's encrypted. So both S3 and RDS databases are all encrypted at rest. From a protection perspective, I think what I was trying to allude to is the levels of logical data segregation are really highly developed, which prevent a lot of movement between our networks. So unlike on-prem where your sort of servers are sitting on your network and anyone who's got access to that network can access it. In the Schoolbox cloud environment, we can't access that network. The way traffic goes in and out of that network is very different, and the way we communicate with that network is very different. And so that is how we protect those systems, is very much through isolation of that data. Having said that, we do have access to certain engineers do have access to S3 buckets and also to RDS databases. And with those certain engineers, we have a very high degree of security around them. So they have the highest level of authorization and authentication, things like FIDO keys and things like that, to ensure their accounts are secure. I guess I'm not sure, Chris, if there's more questions on Instructure, but I thought maybe it would come up, and I thought it might be good to just review like how the attack occurred at Instructure and the lessons that we learnt from that attack and what that's going to mean in terms of our changes to our network and what we're looking at doing. Because we see each one of these as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity for us to improve our protections. And first and foremost, I would say that the 3 attacks that were executed in the Instructure compromise, all of them shouldn't be possible in the Schoolbox environment. From a cross-site scripting attack, those things can always happen. And I mean, we've had cross-site scripting attacks in our platform before. We have pen tests who found cross-site scripting attacks. We've had kids that found cross-site scripting. They've all been patched and fixed pretty rapidly over the years. And so we're fairly confident with where we're at with cross-site scripting attacks, but they do happen from time to time, and I can understand how they would happen. The next thing that happened for Instructure was session theft. So what happened was that their support agent's session was stolen, and then the attacker was able to use that session to then access every school instance and set up API keys for them to then download the data. We don't allow, or firstly, we don't allow the agents or the support agent session to be used to access all of the instances. That just can't happen. We do have the capability to escalate. So a support agent can escalate, reauthorize to get access to your instance, but they have to reauthorize for that. So a stolen session would never be able to execute that. So from our design perspective, that would never happen. I think having said that, though, that session theft obviously is one thing that we realize is probably an area we could improve. And just recently, Chrome has released a new feature called device, can't remember what they call it now, basically device locked sessions. And we are putting on our roadmap right now implementation of device lock sessions. What that means is basically sessions can't be stolen off your device. So even if a support agent is compromised or one of our high engineers is compromised and an attacker steals that session will be useless in any context outside of that person's machine. So that I think is a really strong protection against the Instructure style attack, and something that we're putting on the roadmap, and the lesson we probably took away from that attack that we think we can implement right now to improve our posture. That's not to say that I think that attack would be possible right now, but security is about layers. And for me, putting on more and more layers is always a good thing. And talking about encryption at rest, this is a conversation I've been having with quite a few schools over the years, is around encryption of data, both at rest, but also at the application layer. And obviously we encrypt passwords and things like that within our system. But there is increasingly sensitive PII data that also we want to encrypt. So in the next release of Schoolbox, we're going to start turning on encryption in-app, which will actually encrypt sensitive data. Things like pastoral care records will actually start to be encrypted and only be accessible within the app. That will mean that you can't access that data via the DB connection anymore. It'll basically block that type of access. But we think that that's the right step forward, because if your DB credentials get compromised, we don't want that sensitive data being exfiltrated through those. So we're starting to add an extra layer of encryption on the data as well, specifically for that really sensitive data that we think needs to be extra protected. So there's a bit about some of the security protection we're putting in. I should say that there's a big security measures doc that we keep up to date on our website that has lots of details about the security measures that we do, more than what I can go through today. And it's well worth a read if you want to sort of keep yourself up to date with all the different measures and practices we have implemented at Schoolbox.
James, very wary of the time. I want to try to move through these questions if I can. So the next question's from Damien. He said it would be good to understand if there is a test environment available so we can test integrations with any reporting platforms. It would be beneficial to do this ahead of time before migrating. And his second part of that question is it possible to move a test environment over first and see how that works?
Yeah, great question. I didn't mention this in my migration conversation, but yes, as per the on-premise environment, you have a provisioned a staging server inside our staging environment. So you have that test environment, and that is one of the parts of our migration is setting up that staging environment and doing all of those tests before we do the cutover. So yeah, we do have a test environment. We do use it as part of the ensuring you've got everything working and set up before we do the cutover. So yes, that's all possible. We will work with you to set that environment up. And of course, you'll have that environment going forward for any other testing you want to do in the future. So you do get 2 instances in cloud. You do get both a production and a staging instance.
James, Tony's asked, is there any progress towards the TAS new API layer?
We have been having some good conversations with TAS about that. There is still some pieces that they need to add in. We've given them feedback on the bits and pieces that are missing from that new API layer. And I think that they're pretty on board with adding those extra bits. Once that's sort of done, I think, yeah, we'll be having conversations about moving to that as well. Specifically, we're interested in, does it add additional value for customers? If there are additional value points, for example, it enables us to do markbook sync or something like that, then I think it's a no-brainer. But we're still waiting on TAS to build out that to be feature comparable to the existing API. And at this stage, it's not comparable.
Thanks. Andrew's asked, over the years, Schoolbox has not been great at removing old large files. Our Schoolbox is huge. Would you need to shrink the size before migration, or are we going to pay based on size of Schoolbox?
Great news. As of 26.1, the release that is going out over the next few weeks, we now have a data cleanup and retention policy system. What this enables you to do is when you delete content in Schoolbox, it sits there forever and never gets cleaned up. And this is what you're alluding to with those large files that are sitting there, no longer used. So behind the scenes, we have a system that will review content, and you can put in a retention policy around different data sets. So you'll be able to decide how long you want to keep things deleted for before you want them permanently deleted. And then once they've been permanently deleted, any files that were referenced by that content can be deleted as well. So we are actively now working on tooling, and this is rolling out both to on-prem and cloud, by the way. This isn't unique to one or the other, but both on-prem and cloud are getting this functionality that will deal with data retention and also data file cleanup. So that is rolling out in the next upgrade, and you're going to start to see significant reductions in storage as a result of that work.
Thanks, James. Mark's asked, is the migration time for synergetic schools similar to what was explained at the start, or is it more complicated based on the non-API connector? And has Schoolbox looked into using the newer synergetic API as Digistorm have?
Yeah, so similar to the TAS question there, the synergetic API is not complete enough for us to get all the data that we need to get. So as a result, if we were to implement it and move you to it, it would be a lower level of integration. And I don't think most people want that solution. So we have investigated the API. We've had lots of conversations with Synergetic about it. There's not a lot of active development on that, so I'm not going to hold my breath around that. So from that perspective, we have gone with the network solution of integrating the database over the network. And sort of what I alluded to is I think we can continue to do work to secure that further. And the next step of that is adding in a VPN for managing that traffic, which will allow you to have more control over our access to your network and control how that connection works. But yeah, at the moment, we're sort of stuck with what we've got with Synergetic. We will make sure that that traffic's secure. We'll make sure that that connection's secure. We'll obviously have all of our standard permission checks. And access to that Synergetic service will only be from our internal cloud network. It will not be from anywhere else.
James, can we use the TLS Exchange connector for email sending from Schoolbox Cloud, e.g. via our MS tenant?
Yeah, so I mentioned early on that one of the challenges that we were facing was with email delivery from school hosted services, and Exchange is one of those. Exchange unfortunately does have quite significant rate limits on its relaying in the cloud. It's not a great delivery service. Yeah, so we don't offer it anymore. We are investigating allowing schools to use cloud-based delivery systems such as SendGrid and others that are designed for high delivery volumes. But yeah, Exchange is not one of those. Exchange is really designed around low volume delivery, and it just can't deal with the volumes that Schoolbox is delivering. So unfortunately, we have tried for a long time, and we do have on-premise customers using it, but yeah, there are a lot of challenges with using Exchange. So we do recommend schools either use our infrastructure or use a proper cloud delivery system, and that is something we can discuss with the school as well around how we might support a SendGrid or something like that. Mailgun is another one we've worked with.
James, there's a decent length one, and John has said it's easier if we want to chat online, but I'll read it out. He's glad to hear that all the database object stores are all segregated. Can you share how access is managed internally at Schoolbox, e.g. for the database object level connections? Does each staff member at Schoolbox use unique credentials? E.g. are any SSH connections use short-lived certs or just keys? And at the cloud management level, is there any separation approval required for specific access? Is access limited to Schoolbox owned, managed and compliant devices?
Yeah, I think I touched on a few of these points as I was going, but just to rehash all of them, we have very restricted role-based access to databases. There's basically only 3 or 4 people in the org that can actually access those objects. So that's very restricted down. So no developers, no support agents, all of those things, they don't have access to those layers. So that is very locked down, that access. Of course, it's all done by unique credentials. We have full audit logs of all that access. Any changes to the infrastructure or access to the infrastructure is all audit logged. We have, like I mentioned, review controls. So changes do go through a review process where 2 people have to check off on the changes. So there are, and then finally, I think the question was around device access. We have been implementing Cloudflare Zero Trust across our all of our devices this year, and that work is sort of almost finished, but the last step of that work is really locking down the services to a per user level that you can access on that device. So we're starting the work of really locking down actual access to internal services to only the right roles within our organization. And so that's the next step of that work. That will really start to control even the ability to see certain services that we have available. We've already done that at a user level. We're now going to the network level, if that makes sense. So even if you don't have user access, you won't even have network access to certain services going forward. So those changes are a work in progress, but I expect them to be fully rolled out and implemented in the next 2 or 3 months.
James, a few more to go. We'll try to get through as quickly as we can. Ali asked, will the test instance still be available? Will that also run on the cloud, which I think you've answered. But she said, will it be possible to run live on cloud and test on-prem? No. If you go, yeah, basically no. The answer is no. If you go cloud, you will have a cloud test in the cloud.
And there's good reason for that. You want that environment to be as same as possible as the environment you're testing against. So we provision a staging cluster that is almost identical to a production cluster, and we put your staging instance in that. And that ensures that, any testing, you're testing the same, you're testing the same network level access, all of those things are the same. So it is important that you do have the environments in the same environment for testing purposes. So they are together, but you do get both.
James, Craig's asked, we have sensitive medical information in the pastoral system, including counselling session notes. Can we request that our instance remains in Sydney?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, data location is something you can request. So yeah, as I sort of said early on, we have clusters, and when you migrate to the cloud, you select which cluster or which region is appropriate for you, and we'll put you on the appropriate cluster within that region. So yeah, that is something you do nominate where your data is stored. Sydney, Melbourne are the two Australian data store locations at the moment. And on that note, just on that sensitive data, that's the type of data that I would like to encrypt in the database as well. So that look out in the future for a future update that includes encryption on that data, so that even probably you won't be able to access that data unless you go through the application layer. So just be aware of that's a plan that we've got coming in the future.
And James, the last question that's on the board for today that we've got time for is Matt has asked, someone had asked from a perspective of a departing customer, but he's not concerned about Amazon disappearing. He's more concerned about Schoolbox disappearing, which I'm hoping won't be the case. Therefore, how do I maintain archives of content? Think historical readiness, etc. 10, 20 years from now. Their policy is 70 years minimum retention. Presently, he can glacier an encrypted VM, knowing future Windows will have some systems to spin up their instance. Given you will encrypt pastoral particularly, will you build tools for mass export of coherent academic pastoral data and blobs?
Yeah, great question. Look, I think that we're not quite there yet. It's definitely something for us to think about and put on the roadmap in terms of long-term data retention and how we manage that beyond us. Obviously, I mentioned at the very top that we have a very strong feeling about data sovereignty and maintaining your ownership of your data. But we've got to balance that with the security requirements. And you make a good point around us encrypting the data. What does that mean to your data sovereignty around that data as well? They are very good points. And what we've already been dealing with this, and we probably will be dealing with this in the short term, is specifically around subpoenas. And we're already getting legal requests for data on students. And so with that in mind, we are building specific data export tools for that specific purpose, to be able to export a student's data in a payload that is archivable or deliverable to a lawyer or legal team for the purposes of that. So we are thinking around this space, and we do recognise that we need to provide better tooling for long-term archiving. And sometimes that means transforming the format. One of the things we're thinking about is like, do we put this data in a PDF? Do we put it in a Word doc? Those types of things we still need to work through. And yeah, we're all ears on that. I think the big thing that we wanted to do this year was around the data storage and the retention rules, but probably there is that question next that we look at next year is, how do we make sure that you've got good data export tooling? There's lots of ways to get data out of Schoolbox already. You can query the database. We'd always provide you with a package at the end of your contract. There's lots of tools we already have in place for this, but I think there's more work to be done. That's my sort of quick answer.
James, Saga's just snuck one in at the end. So hopefully it's a quick answer. Is there a way to extract content and student submissions from Schoolbox's common cartridge?
Currently, no. Once again, something else we are really interested in developing for lots of reasons. But yeah, it's been on the roadmap for quite some time now, but I think its time is coming soon. But watch this space.
James, can I say thank you for presenting a really informative webinar? Can I thank all 120 people that joined us today? Hopefully you got the information that you were looking for in the cloud webinar. I would ask that if you've got any questions or you're keen to continue to explore this option, to please reach out to your school engagement manager, who are well and truly prepared and really capable of having these conversations with you as you consider your options moving forward. On behalf of Schoolbox, thanks very much, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you, everyone.